Welcome to another episode of Touring the AFC South. I am your host, Mike Patton. We're going to get into some contract talk. Some extensions got doled out. And we're going to get into, of course, the mailbag. Got a couple good questions for you. And we're also going to get into a potential trade target for an AFC South team. But first, we got to talk about Mina Kimes kind of brought up from ESPN. She brought up B plus wide receiver or over an A plus running back. Let me just kind of give you a little bit of context. He said basically, when it comes to this draft, you got an A plus running back in Jeremiah Love. It can do everything. You got, not to slight Cornell Tate or any wide receivers, but say you pick a wide receiver that's not necessarily as highly rated, but in a passing league, you definitely could use one. So she was making the point that basically, Jeremiah Love probably wouldn't have as much value. It would kind of be kind of pointless to kind of draft him if you're a Tennessee Titan, or if the Tennessee Titans organization. Thought that was pretty interesting. And, Mina is really, really smart. She's an incredible talent, understands the game backwards and forwards, and understands the game more than probably a ton of people do. But in this one, I gotta disagree with her on this one. Love you, Mina, but I gotta disagree with you on this one. Now, I understand, the value of wide receivers, and of course, this, version of the NFL where it's a passing league. I totally get that, but I'm just gonna kind of go with a few different things I know. Marshall Faulk with the St. Louis Rams, when they were in St. Louis, by the way, was really, really talented. And he took that offense to another level. You want to know why? He's a running back that could run the football. He could split out, play in the slot. He could do all those different things for the St. Louis Rams. And he made them an incredibly dangerous team because he could touch the ball he could get the ball at any point on the field and be dangerous from any point on the field. Christian McCaffrey for the San Francisco 49ers. Currently, he had the most receptions on that 49ers team, as well as was their leading running back. And that offense basically ran through him. And, you're looking at some of the weapons. You're looking at that team. They probably had no business winning as many games as they did. However, they did so with McCaffrey being the bell cow, not only in the running game, but the receiving game, catching option routes, lining up outside, all those different things to be effective and be dangerous from any point on the field. I say all that to say, Mr. Jeremiah Love is a playmaker. He's a guy that can line up in the backfield. He's a guy that can line up in the slot. He can do all these different things, and every point on the field, he is dangerous. And now this is no offense to Cornell Tate at all. But Cornell Tate didn't line up in the backfield and running routes out the backfield, option routes. He isn't doing all those different things. He does not stress a defense probably as much as what Jeremiah Love could stress a defense with all the places he could line up and all the things he could do and the attention that he could potentially crave. So with that being said, I respect Mina Kimes. She is a brilliant person when it comes to, a lot of different things. But in this instance, I just have to disagree with her. I believe that, if the Titans were to pick Jeremiah Love, that would be an incredible weapon. I disagree with not only Mina Kimes, but anybody else that kind of holds the same kind of sentiment. Disagree with you. I don't agree. And to me, to be honest, you look at and listen to what the Titans have said. They're going to pick the best player available. They are. And it could be Jeremiah Love. So there we go. That's my thoughts on it. But, of course, that isn't the only thing that went down this week. Of course, we talked about, last week, of course, you had Travon Walker signing his big, big deal to stay with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Let me give you a little bit of the numbers on that one. He had 4 years, $110 million. He had $77 million of that guaranteed, with $50 million guaranteed at signing. Now, that makes him the highest paid, one of the highest paid edge rushers currently in the NFL right now. Now, if you look at his sacks, he has 27 and a half career sacks in his 4-year career so far. Now, some would say the numbers need to be better because if you look at it, Will Anderson Jr. has more sacks than he does in less years because Will Anderson's been in the league 3 years. Travon Walker's been in the league more. However, of course, you do have to account for the injuries and things like that, which, of course, he had 3.5 sacks last season after 10 sacks in 2024 and 10 and a half in, I'm sorry, 10 sacks in 2024 and 10 and a half sacks in 2023. So, with that being said, of course, plenty are wondering what's going on, why are they giving him all this money with the steep drop off. Plenty of people are forgetting this man was out there playing with one hand in week 4 versus the San Francisco 49ers, or week 3, week 4, somewhere around there against the 49ers. He suffered a wrist injury. I believe he had to have surgery on that as well. And he came back with a club on his hand 2 weeks later. Now, with that club on his hand, of course, you can't grab anything with one hand. So it's kind of hard to potentially get a sack with just using your right hand. He injured his left wrist. So, with that being said, it's kind of hard to get sacks. It's easier to get yourself in position to, of course, stop the run and things like that. But you need both your hands to disengage from blockers and things like that, or also to bring down quarterbacks as well. It doesn't necessarily happen a lot with one hand. So 3.5 sacks is what he had, unfortunately for him. Had that club on his hand out there. So, like I mentioned, can't grab. And then plus, probably when the club came off, didn't quite have the same amount of strength in that same hand. So, with that being said, we'll see what happens when it goes into, of course, next year, when he's, presumably fully healthy, both hands able to use. But that's probably the reason for the decline, not necessarily that he fell off in terms of his production. So let's be fair here. He was playing with essentially one hand for majority of the season. And I think that's more the reason he had 3.5 sacks than him not getting it done out there. Now, I will say, with the contract he is given, he definitely is going to be expected to get more than 3.5 sacks, especially healthy next year. I mean, he was trending, to get double-digit sacks every year, being the 2024 and 2023 numbers. So I expect him to be back in double digits. I expect him to stuff the run like he usually does. And also I expect him to essentially maybe step into a leadership role for this team. I mean, look at the Jacksonville Jaguars defensively last year. I mean, they were number one against the run. They didn't necessarily get after the quarterback as much as you would like for them to, which, they could potentially bring in another edge rusher to go along with Josh Hines-Allen and Travon Walker, which, quite as kept, Josh Hines-Allen didn't quite produce as much as people would have liked him to. But I digress. So, you could have another, edge rusher added to that. And, they need pressure. That was the one thing they didn't quite do a ton of last year. They did stuff the run, number one, stuff of the run. They did create a lot of turnovers. However, they don't have that one elite pressure guy. With paying Travon Walker, I think they want him to be that elite pressure guy. But can he do that? Can he continue that growth that's kind of stunted last year with the wrist injury? And, can he be that guy? They need him to be that guy in order for that defense to continue to be at a steady rate. Because let's be honest, you can't really go into the 2026 season expecting the turnovers they got in the 2025 season. A lot of times that next season, it doesn't work out that way for an opportunistic defense. Some of those stats kind of slack off a little bit. And you have to depend on stopping the run and, in the pass game, doing some things too, which, of course, they did have some issues there. But I believe Travis Hunter will help solve some of those issues as well. We'll see what happens. But all in all, they're expecting, to me, I'm expecting, I should say, Travon Walker to be better in the run game, to be healthy, and to get double digit sacks and be a leader for that Jacksonville Jaguars team. They absolutely, absolutely need him to be that. Of course, they're depending on their young stars to continue to grow up and evolve on their team, because of course on offense you have Trevor Lawrence, who they're depending on to grow and evolve. They're looking at maybe Brian Thomas Jr. getting better and continue to grow. I know those trade rumors are out there for him, but defensively, you have a Travis Hunter that's entering his second year that's going to be probably more active defensively. You have a Travon Walker, you have a Josh Hines Allen, who's kind of like the elder statesman of the D lineman on that team in terms of years being there. You have Olakon at the linebacker spot, who's a tackling machine. So you do have, some pieces there that are there for leadership, but ultimately you need your best player to step up and be that guy, be that leader, and be part of the young nucleus of this team going forward, and being a huge contributing member of that young nucleus as well. So we'll see what happens when it comes to Travon Walker. But yeah, kind of ease up on him. You don't know necessarily all that was going on. Of course, the wrist injury last season kind of slowed down his production. Now, there's another player that is being talked about, and that's in the D-line arena. But he's not with the Jacksonville Jaguars. That would be Dexter Lawrence. Dexter Lawrence requested a trade this week from the New York Giants this week. Of course, a lot of people just think it's kind of posturing between him and his agent to get a new deal done and keep him a New York Giant. And, many do not expect him to leave the New York Giants. But if it is to happen, there are a few teams that actually looked at him. One of those teams is the Green Bay Packers. Yeah, they definitely could use somebody in the interior after losing Kenny Clark last year. Then you have the Chicago Bears. They got to get better defensively and in a hurry. He could help them. Then there is the Buffalo Bills. I mean, imagine Dexter Lawrence and Ed Oliver together in the trenches. That ought to be illegal, those two. Woo. But the other team that was mentioned is, yep, you guessed it, the team we just talked about, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Yeah, they are the other team that has been mentioned. Now, the Jags like to stuff the run, and they're really good against, stuffing the run. They were number one in the NFL last year. They gave up the least rushing yards per game last year in the NFL. And adding a Dexter Lawrence makes them only stronger up front. I mean, that guy, when he is dialed in, he can be nasty in the trenches. And last year people talked about how he kind of didn't, I guess, play up the expectations or the expectations of others for him. And we're wondering, hey, maybe is he slipping? Is he this? Is he that? But I think with either a new contract or him being happy in this situation, I think you get a better Dexter Lawrence. Now, who knows? That happiness could be in Jacksonville, but there's a couple things that would need to happen in regards to that. Jacksonville would have to make decisions on a Mr. Eric Armstead or a Davon Hamilton. Now, both are D linemen. Both can play inside. Both have pretty nice cap numbers. So one option is to trade one of these guys, which it'll be interesting to see if anyone would be interested in trading for the size of their contracts, by the way. Or you release one of these guys or restructure one of these guys. I'm sorry. That'll be interesting in its own right as well. But either way it goes, the Jacksonville Jaguars have $5.15 million in cap space right now, and that's not enough for a Dexter Lawrence to be on that team. So they would have to definitely get magical, massage the cap a little bit, restructure some deals, maybe try to trade somebody. Then, and maybe then they could fit a Dexter Lawrence on that team. But I will say he's great against the run, but he also is good rushing the passer. And having an interior rusher that can get to the quarterback from inside the pocket, woo-wee! I tell you this, that would make Travon Walker happy. That would make Josh Hines Allen happy because the quarterback may not have anywhere to step up in the pocket. And if that's the case, the quarterback has to run outside of the pocket and make that nice big old loop. Well, he could probably run right into Josh Hines Allen or Travon Walker. And both of those guys will be eaten because of Dexter Lawrence. That's just something to think on. Just something to think on. But, of course, like I said, it's probably at this point, all reports and indications are he's not going to leave the Giants. They'll figure something out, a deal, something. We'll see what happens. But, it definitely, for Jacksonville Jaguars fans, it's definitely a nice dream to have Mr. Dexter Lawrence in the trenches for them. Boy, oh boy. Man, that dude could wreck some shop. Definitely. Woo. Boy, oh boy. Speaking of wrecking shop, there's one guy that got an extension. That'd be Will Anderson Jr. and CJ Stroud. And along with him, CJ Stroud got an extension. Now, they got their 5th-year option picked up. So it isn't necessarily like they got a huge extension. No. We're not going there just yet. We're a little bit off from there. However, both of them, their 5th-year options basically secures them with the team, not only this season, but with in the 2027 season as well, where, hopefully at that point for the Texans, they've made their decisions on their extensions or non-extensions for both of them. Going into the 5th-year option for both of them, CJ Stroud's is $25.904 million, and for Will Anderson Jr., it's $21.512 million. Now, I know some will say maybe they should switch those numbers, but hey, it's the slot where they were drafted, not necessarily their impact. So that's why CJ Stroud's number is higher than Will Anderson Jr. because CJ Stroud was drafted number 2. Will Anderson was drafted number 3. Now, they're both guys that are extension eligible, by the way. And you've heard a lot about the Will Anderson Jr. and an extension and potentially talking about an extension. I even asked the general manager for the Texans about an extension for Will Anderson Jr. and then CJ Stroud. I asked him about that during the actual NFL Combine. He had some thoughts on it and basically was, kind of keeping it more in-house. But those discussions are probably happening right now and still happening probably right now. But in terms of Will Anderson Jr., I mean, you probably like to go ahead and get that one done because the longer it goes, the more money he's going to cost them. So you might want to go ahead and get that one done and get that one all sewn up and ready to go. But when it comes to CJ Stroud, it's kind of like he's kind of regressed a little bit the last couple of seasons, and he's not necessarily the same guy. With that being said, the 2026 season is a huge one for him. He'll be in the second year under offensive coordinator Nick Cali, who came over from the Los Angeles Rams, by the way. He does have more offensive linemen they brought in, more recently Wyatt Teller from the Cleveland Browns, who is an excellent guard. So, the protection should be better. You also, you've got younger wide receivers. You got a Nico Collins out there. You have, a lot of young guys from Iowa State, which, they have 3 wide receivers from Iowa State, if you did not know. And they're all, 3rd and 2nd year guys, which is quite interesting. But so, he's going to be playing for, potentially that contract extension. Now, if he doesn't play well, it's going to be interesting what decision the Houston Texans make. Now, I will say they have all mentioned that CJ Stroud is their guy, and things like that. So, there's no indication that they will not be giving him an extension when the time comes or when they agree on it. However, if he comes out and has a rough year, it's definitely going to be interesting to see what those numbers are if that extension happens. Now, let's say he does play well and you give him an extension. You give him an extension, you have Will Anderson Jr. on an extension. Now you have decisions with the rest of that roster. Now, let me give you a few guys that are probably looking for money right now, or probably going to be in need of some money or an extension soon. Azeez Al-Shire, their linebacker, they brought over a couple years ago. Yeah, it's extension time for him. Also, you have Kamari Lassiter, their excellent number 2 corner. He is entering year 3. He's a second-round draft pick. He is not a first-round draft pick, which means there is no fifth-year option. So, going to have to visit the table with him soon. And again, you have a few other decisions to make as well. You can look around and point them out. You have a Daniil Hunter that's getting older, and they're paying him a boatload of money for this next year. So there's decisions that have to be made if you're the Houston Texans. And, of course, those are going all into this season and next year as well and beyond with some of the great young players that they have. And remember, not all these young players did they get in the first round. So some of them will be up for new contracts after year 4. Decisions. Nick Cesario, the light's on you, good sir. All right. We're going to finish up the show with the mailbag. We got a couple good questions that are coming in for this week's mailbag, and maybe one will make you chuckle just a little bit. I'm going to start off with that one. It's going to make you chuckle. All right. Let's start with it. Here it goes. This question is from Joan in Greensboro, North Carolina. How much does the Titans organization miss Coach Mike Vrabel? Well, I'll tell you this. At this current time, they're probably not missing him a whole lot given the circumstances and the things that are going on and talked about him in media right now. Not going to go into what's going on with him right now, but I'm pretty sure if you have been watching social media, you have seen a few pictures of him with a certain young woman. That's all I'm going to say. As far on the field, it's on the field. When it comes to Mike Vrabel and how much do the Titans miss him, honestly, I don't think they necessarily miss him a ton. I know, people talk about how rough it was for them to watch him win Coach of the Year and then go to the Super Bowl and things like that. And I totally understand that. But I believe the Titans have turned that page. They're not necessarily thinking about that anymore. And they're looking forward to Robert Saleh and the things that he can do for this organization. Now, that's not to say that Mike Vrabel did not do some good things here in Nashville. I'm here in Nashville, by the way. But, eventually there comes a point where you have to move forward. You do have to move forward. And, he did some great things here in Nashville. But in life, some rain must fall. And in life, you do have to move on. And, it may not always end the way you wanted to. So with that being said, some decisions were made. Those are the decisions the Titans will live with. Those are decisions that Mike Vrabel will live with. And they have to move forward. So do I think they miss Coach Mike Vrabel? I know some fans do, and I understand that. But eventually there comes a point where you got to move on. You can't keep bringing up that same name over and over and over again. Just can't. It is what it is at that point. But thank you for the question, Joe. And the last question I have, of the AFC South teams, who, in your opinion, will benefit the most from the upcoming NFL draft? This is from Ed in Auburn, New York. Thank you, Ed. All right. As far as that, I think there's only one team that can benefit the most from the upcoming NFL draft. That's Tennessee Titans. I mean, Plenty have talked about how they have, been not played well, and then players got hurt and things like that as well. But they need to continue to develop and add talent and get depth. That's the big thing. Develop depth on that team at the cornerback spot, the wide receiver spot, the offensive line spot, a lot of different places, linebacker spot as well. So I think this draft could definitely benefit them the most. Another team, Indianapolis Colts. That's another team this draft can benefit the most. I mean, if you put them in order, it'd be the Titans, and to me, it'd be the Colts. Because the Titans, like I mentioned, they have some depth things to work on, some holes to fill still as well. The Colts definitely have some depth things to work on, especially at, you guessed it, the cornerback position. Outside of, you got Gardner, you got Moore, and you got Mooney Ward. And I totally understand that. But, at one point, all three of these guys were hurt. And where'd you go from there? So continue to build that depth. The wide receiver room, yes, definitely they need some depth there. They signed Alec Pierce to a gigantic contract, traded Michael Pittman Jr. They have Joshua Downs. It's on I believe he's in his last year of his contract. And after that, I don't know what to tell you. They brought in Nick Westbrook and Kenny for a 1-year deal, but not sure that's depth you're going to build and develop with. They got a few other things. Probably going to continue to draft some offensive linemen. Continue to try to find that depth piece or that main piece or player. They're thinking it's Latu Latu at defensive end, the edge rusher. Linebacker, continue to draft there and get younger as well. So, they've got a few things that they need to work on as well and get in this draft that can benefit them also. As far as the Jacksonville and the Texans, they're pretty set in a lot of different places, a few things here or there. But for the most part, they're in really, really good shape, both of those teams, for most of the positions. Thank you, Ed, for that question. And that brings me to the end of the show. I want to thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Touring the AFC South. I am your host, Mike Patton. You can find me on the artist formerly known as Twitter at Mike Patton82. That's MikePaton 82. You can also find me on Blue Sky at the same handle. Instagram and Threads, you can find me there as well. That's at THA, not THE, _general_MP. Now, Touring the AFC South, you can find on all listening platforms, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, you name it, we are there. You can also find this podcast on the Mike Patton Network on YouTube, where you can go ahead and subscribe in all those different places. You can click the bell on YouTube so that way you don't miss any of the episodes. I thank you all again for tuning into this episode of Touring the AFC South. We're out. Peace.